So my story also goes back to that era before cell phones. I was a junior in college, early in my junior year, and I realized that if I kept up with the pace of classes that I'd been taking so far, I could graduate a semester early. And I had this chunk of money. My mother's sister had sent me a chunk of money, which at the time it seemed like a huge amount of money. Nowadays, not so much. But it was enough that it would have paid off a good portion of my loans. Or I could buy a van and go out and see America. And I had a friend who lived 2 doors down from me in college who had also been taking classes at an accelerated pace, and he realized that he could graduate a semester early. So by the middle of junior year, we were planning to be out in December of 1986. And over that summer, the summer of 1986, looking in the want ads, I found a 1983 Ford Econoline E150 van, which for $4,800 I bought. It came already outfitted. There was already, the prior owner had put in a platform bed in the back with storage underneath. So John and I adjusted a little bit. We made 2 separate platforms, each one on hinges so we could keep our stuff separately underneath. And we took a queen-size futon in his basement in Princeton, New Jersey, and cut it in half. And then we sewed up each half into its own separate mattress. If you ever try this at home, it turns out it is not possible to pull half of a queen-size mattress through a sewing machine. We got everything sewn up. And in January of 1987, so we were out of college for just a few weeks, in January of 1987, we headed out. We left Princeton. And we had this trip sort of mapped out, but only sort of. We were very flexible, so that when we got to Washington, D.C., D.C. was on the trip partly for official reasons. John was interested in graduate school at the University of Maryland, and he wanted to visit it. We went to D.C., we went to some museums, planning to go to the University of Maryland on Monday morning. It snowed. A lot. Like, literally 2 feet of snow. Now, Washington, D.C. is, for all practical purposes, a tropical city. And 2 inches of snow, everything shuts down. Well, you can imagine when there's 2 feet, everything really shuts down. So we spent a day, there was nothing to do. We had camped in the van overnight on a street in Alexandria, and we woke up and there was no place to go because we could not get anywhere. And we spent that day helping to push other people's cars. By the following morning, it was possible to get out of town, just barely. I-95 at this point, which, you know, the major highway on the east coast of the United States of America, it's down to basically a 1-lane road, except it's not a full lane. It's 2 ruts with a hump of snow in the middle. We just got on it and we drove. And about somewhere, I don't know, 36, 48 hours after leaving Washington behind, we're now in central Florida. And we're camping in Ocala National Forest. And we wake up in the morning, we had arrived at night in the dark. And we wake up and we step out of the van, the sun is just coming up, and we're plainly on another planet. There are huge trees with giant leaves, and there's Spanish moss and ferns, you know, the size of Volkswagens. Behind one of those trees, we're sure there's a dinosaur. We're somewhere else entirely. It was magical. That's the sort of experience that we were looking for in this trip, was taking ourselves and seeing things that we had never seen before. My experience of the United States before this trip extended to a relatively narrow band of the East Coast. One summer, my father and I had driven as far as Detroit. But as we headed through the South and then through the West, I was seeing all of this for the first time. It was amazing, it was remarkable, it was literally life-changing. I might not have had the best traveling companion for this, though. The first intimation that things were really, at least that I remember, the first intimation that things were not going especially well was in New Orleans. We're in New Orleans. I mean, this city that's blues and food and all this other stuff, it rains in New Orleans. And while I walked around New Orleans just with my eyes wide open and my mouth hanging open, John sat in the van and read a book. Okay, if that's what he's interested in doing, fine. So we continued on the trip. We're now probably a month and a half in. We head across Texas. We're still heading across Texas. We go 1,000 miles from New Orleans, and we're still in Texas. I mean, this country is so vast. And in West Texas, we go to Big Bend National Park in the far western corner of Texas, right against the Rio Grande. It's called the Big Bend because the river makes a big bend there. And there are some mountains, the Chisos Mountains, in the middle of it. And we get into Big Bend late one afternoon. We go out to the campsite. We're traveling with a Rand McNally Road Atlas and a Rand McNally Campground Atlas, and we sort of, let's go there. The campground at Big Bend is probably the size of Columbia County. There's a campsite here, and you drive a couple miles, and there's another campsite down the road. There's nothing separating them in the way of trees or other privacy except for 2 miles. So we pull into our campsite, and we rig up the tarp that we had for a tent on the side of the van so we can set our food out underneath. And then we decide, oh, there's a hill over there. We'll go take a walk. And we walk, and we walk, and we walk, and we finally get to the base of this hill, and we start climbing. And we realize, John too, his experience of the West was relatively limited, and neither one of us had a sense of the scale of this nation. It's vast. Even its small pieces are vast. So we have now been climbing up this hill for a half hour. The top is still somewhere way over there. The van is a speck in the distance, and it's starting to get dark. So at this point, we realized we just need to get the heck out of here, and we stumbled down this hill, cholla cactuses poking up our pants legs. Again, a sense of wonder at the world that at the time we seemed to both share. About a week later, we're in Arizona. And in between Phoenix and Flagstaff, off in the desert, there's a new city being built. It's called Arcosanti. It's an Italian architect named Paolo Soleri, a visionary, kind of a nut. But he is going to show us how the city of the future can be built. So he and some acolytes are pounding huge mounds of earth in the desert and pouring thin shell concrete over this and then digging out all the dirt and leaving these giant cathedral-like spaces. They had, 1.5 of these things done at the time that we were there. I took the tour. John sat in the van and read a book. I came back from looking at Arcosanti, not thinking that this was, in fact, the city of the future, but really impressed with the gumption of these people and the vision that had created it. And I came back to the van all excited. And I said to John, that was an exciting tour. And he looks up from his book and he said, looks like shit from here. And I completely lost it. Now again, there must have been incidents along the way that I have forgotten about. But at that point, enough had happened that this was just the breaking point. And I shouted at him for a long time. And I said, look, this trip just is not working. You and I have really different visions about how this trip should be. I want to see every little thing, and you're content to just drive and look at a few things. The point of this trip originally had been to go to Alaska. I said to John, look, let's just head for Alaska. This is our one and only chance. We're never going to be this young, this free again. Let's just try to get there. That's going to be a lot of driving. So within the week, we were across the border. We had gone up the West Coast. We hadn't gotten as far as the Pacific, so I still hadn't seen the Pacific Ocean. Went through Seattle. We outfitted the van. We got an extra water tank and some other stuff. And we cross the border. We get a bunch of Canadian money, and we drive. And it's now Friday, the 13th of March, 1987. We're between Prince George and Vanderhoof in the middle of British Columbia, effectively in the middle of nowhere. We're on a 2-lane highway. It's flat, it's straight. We meet log trucks periodically throughout the afternoon, and it's starting to snow. And John's driving. At some point, as this snow is starting to actually accumulate, I said, John, I think you're going a little fast. He said, yeah. And at some point, it's late afternoon now, it's getting dark, and John loses control of the van. And at 55 miles an hour, we do a 180 across this road. And we come down in the ditch, facing the wrong direction. We seem to be in one piece. Now, remember I had said that there were log trucks meeting us? If this had happened when one of those was coming towards us, that would have been the end. And the ditch that we ended up in, well, 100 yards in either direction, there was no ditch. There was just an embankment that we would have rolled down. I looked at John. I said, we have to find our way out of here. I had realized at this point, I'd gotten out of the van and looked around. One of the tires had actually popped off the rim in the course of this. We're not getting out of there by ourselves. We need a tow truck. And we're in the middle of nowhere. And as Tara had said, this is the era before cell phones. I said to John, I'm going to go get us help. You stay here and read a book. So I walked out in the middle of the road, this 2-lane road, and waited for a vehicle. And eventually one comes towards me from the direction that we were headed. And I step out in the lane and I wave. And this poor woman, driving a station wagon with her 3 kids in the back, she fishtails to a stop to keep from running me over in the middle of this highway. I say, ma'am, I'm really sorry, but we've had an accident. Can you get me to a phone? And she, of course, she's Canadian. She says, of course, hop in. And she drives me 15 miles to the nearest telephone, his little roadside bar. She drops me there. I go inside. I say to the guy behind the bar, can I look at your phone book, please? And up ahead is Vanderhoof, British Columbia. That's the nearest town. And I look under tow trucks. And I call. And I say, do you take AAA? And the guy's like, yeah. I say, we're somewhere east of you. If you find a beige van in the ditch, that's the one. He's like, yeah, I'll find it. So that's all taken care of. But the van's 15 miles away, and I'm standing in a roadside bar. I talk to a guy at the bar. I say, you happen to be headed in that direction? Yeah, sure, come on, hop in. So I get in his pickup, and we start driving west. Now it's actually dark. It is evening, night, in the wilds of British Columbia. We drive for about 15 miles, and eventually we pass a place that looks like, I think, where the van had been. It's not there anymore. So help has come. We keep going, and after a while, up ahead we see flashing lights, and it turns out that's the van. It's been pulled out of the ditch. John is driving it, headed for Vanderhoof. He's got the 4-ways on, and he's going very slowly. Somehow, I don't remember exactly how we did this, but somehow we made it plain that it was me, stop the van, and I got in, I said, I'll drive. And we head for Vanderhoof. So the tow truck had pulled us out of the ditch. Not the tow truck that I called. Some other tow truck just happened to be driving by, and he pulls us out of the ditch. And then the tow truck that I called shows up, and they're like, both these tow truck guys are like, we want to be paid. So the next morning in Vanderhoof, I had to go talk to these 2 tow truck drivers and pay each of them. And I said to John, we're going home. And 4 days later, we were in his driveway in Princeton, New Jersey. We had done the last 1,000 miles from Minneapolis nonstop. And as we were pulling into the driveway, we had a tape deck in the van, and I had the Talking Heads' Road to Nowhere playing at full volume. After that, I headed out by myself, and I spent another couple of years wandering around the country. On my next trip, when I left New York next, on my very first day, I came right through Bloomsburg, went right down Route 11, have no memory of it whatsoever. John and I stayed friends. And he came to my wedding, I went to his wedding. We haven't seen each other many times, but we've stayed in touch. And in 2018, I went up to Boston. He lives in Boston. Went up for another friend's wedding. I stayed with him. And in the course of that visit, I said, John, I've been thinking back, all those years ago when we took that trip across the country in my van. And we had some really amazing adventures. And I said, do you remember how that trip ended? how, we were out in the wilds of British Columbia, and you were going too fast, and I told you to slow down, and you drove the van off the road, and I had to go find that tow truck, and do you remember all that? And John said, nope. Thank you all for being here. We'll look forward to doing this again.